Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's edition of the Passionately Wrong podcast. Our regular listeners know that Randy and I both went to the American School of The Hague, and we think that provided us with some interesting and unique experiences and perspectives. What we're starting here today with our first guest for this series is interviewing other classmates who went to the American School of The Hague. Of course, that was just a point in their lives, and they have lots of other interesting things to talk about. But we're going to use those similarities to give us a foot in the door to understand, okay, who is this person? And to understand their perspectives in life as well. And our first guest today, I'm happy to say, is Erek Dorman, class of 86. Erek, welcome on the show. Thanks very much for agreeing to be our, I won't say guinea pig test case, and for answering some questions. And we'll see where this interview goes. So let me start with this question. What years were you at Ash, and why were you and your family in Holland at that time?
I was there from 83 to 86. So most of my high school career, we were there because my father was in the U.S. Army and he was stationed at the U.S. Embassy as part of the Defense Attaché office.
And I think you, therefore, being a family member in the military like that, probably spent time in a bunch of different countries prior to that point. You want to give us the whistle stop tour of some of the places you lived in?
I was born in Germany. My dad was in the Army then. Then he left the Army for a brief period, about a year and a half, joined again. So we went from Kassel, Germany, where I was born, to Pontiac, Michigan, where my dad was from. My mother was German. I was born in Germany. And then he joined the Army again, and we went back to Germany, this time to Würzburg in Bavaria for 3 years. We did 3 years in Vienna at the American Embassy there. We did 18 months at the Pentagon, and then I went to Holland for 3.5 years.
Did you spend much time in Europe after you finished high school? I know you came back to the US for college. Maybe you fill in a little bit of those blanks.
Well, I've been back to Europe a few times since then, just to travel around and see places that I didn't get to see while I was there. I did get to see a lot while I lived there. My parents were big on making sure that we traveled, even if it was a weekend or a day trip somewhere. We always spent time on the road looking at things. I've been to Italy and Switzerland and all over Austria, of course, France, England, all low countries. I mean, you name it, with the exception of the East Bloc, because we're still talking pre-communism when we lived there. So, or pre-wall coming down. So we couldn't travel over there because of my dad's job. But since then, I've been able to travel over there.
Do you remember what it was like moving back to the US or moving to the US when you attended college? Did that feel weird to you?
It did. The culture shock then, I mean, it was bad, but nowhere near as bad when we first went back to do 18 months at the Pentagon. That was in the early 80s before I went to Holland. Culture shock was just awful. Everything from mindsets to shopping habits to products available to lack of fresh butchers and bakers and you name it. And then when college came around, my culture shock was really based more on stupid things like drinking ages and the high age in the United States, where we never even bat an eye in Germany about sending an 8-year-old with some money to go get a 6-pack at the local store. It's that sort of thing.
Yeah, for people who maybe didn't go to the American School of The Hague or live in Holland, let's just say that they have a relatively relaxed attitude towards people of high school age being able to enjoy themselves a little bit. And so when you go from high school in Holland to college in the US and all of a sudden you're not supposed to drink for 3 more years, that's a big shock.
Yeah, and it's a minor thing, all things considered, but it tells you something about excuse me, mental attitudes here versus there. The attitudes towards recreational marijuana use, for example, there it's no big deal and people don't think twice about it. But here, for this being the so-called land of the free, we have a lot of restrictions.
Do you guys, so you guys went back the same time I did, which was 86, right?
Mhm.
And that was the year that the drinking age changed. So when I started college for the first 2 months, we could drink. At 18, I don't know if you guys remember this. At 18, we could drink for the first 3 months, and then it switched, and then we could drink. So everyone was going through that weird experience, not just us, but the whole United States was. But it was just more impactful. And while you said it's a small thing, it's probably not a small thing for us 18, 19-year-olds at the time, because even while we could drink under 18 in most of our European countries, now we're actually breaking the law in a way, and kind of like what's going on.
Sure. And when I came to the US, at that point, drinking alcohol wasn't some taboo or forbidden thing for me. It just seems stupid that I can't just go to the bar and buy a drink. But I mean, alcohol flowed. It flowed like wine. It was everywhere. So we didn't have a problem finding it. It was just, it just seemed stupid.
So I remember we overlapped for the years that you were there, Eric, and you and I actually were friends in high school. I remember you as being a gifted artist who had a particular fascination with military themes. And I guess the military makes sense, perhaps given your upbringing. Did you, first of all, is that accurate? Did you have an interest in military things, and were you able to continue your interest in drawing? You drew hilarious cartoons and spoofs of our classmates and our teachers. And actually, the thing that got me on Facebook ultimately, some years ago, after I retired, so it wasn't that long ago, was I came across a trove of drawings that you had made and I had hoarded over the years. And I just scanned them in and posted them to Facebook. I'm like, this is so great. Look at the things that you were drawing back then. So anyway, tell us how you were able to use those skills as life went on.
I wind up being a graphic designer. So I use my drawing skills. They've matured quite a bit since then. So it was really amusing to see that blast from the past and all the drawings I did in high school. A few years ago, I had a flood in my basement and it destroyed a box that had all my notebooks in it. And my notebooks were nothing but pictures. I mean, there were fewer words in there than there were any kind of drawings. And that's how I remembered things from classes. I continued that. And the thing with the military, you'd think it was because my dad was in the army, but my father was never very pro-military like that. He didn't promote it to me. He didn't glorify it. It was just his job. And I was aware of it. But my love of military history really came from my uncle, my mom's brother, my German uncle, who was incredibly versed in all things European and Soviet military history. And that kind of sparked it for me. I mean, when I was 9 years old, the first real adult hardcover book I got was Sea Battles of the 20th Century. I still have that. That's where that started. And I went on to major in history, and I have been a reenactor for over 20 years, doing everything from Revolutionary War to Civil War to World War I, World War II. I even was an extra on a movie about the Jamestown settlement. History just runs through my blood, and it's not, at this point, it's not just military history, but the fact that history is the only discipline that requires you to learn a little bit about everything. So I have to know about philosophy, literature, religion, political theory, not just the military, because to understand what all these changes mean and what their impact is. And so I love that. And for that reason, I'm constantly reading about coinage and archaeological excavations. And I like reading personal letters from soldiers over the wars that really show personal insight into the conflicts. And that's what I like to relate to people. So I've been a tour guide. I've been a presenter to the public at the national parks and museums. Yeah, I love it.
I think you partly answered a question that I've been wondering about, but maybe you could confirm it, which is the purpose of the reenactors going out and doing these sometimes very elaborate presentations. Is that for their benefit because they just have fun dressing up and wearing old costumes? Or it sounds like in your case, there really is an interest in sharing details of that history in an engaging way to people who might not otherwise be interested enough to go to pay attention to something.
Sure. That with the reenactors, kind of like the actual military, they come from all walks of life, all levels of education, all levels of interest. And you've got those that just want to do it to play cowboys and Indians and go blow a bunch of black powder. and then others that want to study the minutia and the detail of the uniforms, the weaponry, the tactics, the battlefields themselves. And anytime I got an opportunity to engage with the public, that was my favorite thing to do. I mean, I had a lot of fun getting on a horse and leading a cavalry charge at the back, but that only gives me so much contact with the people I'm trying to teach. And you can't teach without context. What we're showing at reenactments are tiny little slices of history, and people can't just study that in a vacuum. That's what I enjoy talking to, especially kids. But anybody that has a little bit of an interest doesn't understand the history that happened in their own backyards.
Do you guys have a fund or a nonprofit thing that helps you with to create your uniforms and get all the materials? Or are you guys all out of pocket, like the Society for Creative Anachronism? Pretty much you're building everything with your own hands and your own materials.
There are hardcore reenactors who insist on everything being hand stitched and whatnot, but there are plenty of outlets. They're called sutlers like they were back then, but they're basically retail outlets that sell all the uniforms, all the accoutrements. Weapons are readily available, either reproduction or originals, but it's all out of pocket. It is not cheap. I mean, if you want your kids to stay away from drugs, get them into reenacting.
There's a reenactment of D-Day jump in Germany, not Germany, France, northern France in Normandy.
Oh, yeah.
And that happens every year. And the unit was stationed at my base in Vicenza, Italy. I was there for 4 years. It wasn't my unit, but the 173rd there does the jump every year.
Yeah.
And when they jump, there's all these reenactors there in like pristine Jeeps of the time, all the German uniforms and the British and the French uniforms, and they're all there. And they all watch the guys jump in, and then they celebrate with them. They take them out to eat and buy them beer. You can't even buy your own beer if you're a soldier jumping in there. It's really great.
Yeah, I know there's an American reenactment unit here in the States that portrays the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment for the 101st Airborne, which ever since Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers came out, that's all anybody wants to do. And that's the only soldier who ever fought in World War II. But these guys require you to be jump qualified to be part of their group.
Wow.
Yeah, they'll kick you out of C-47 somewhere, and they do it 5 times in a day, and then you can join their group.
Yeah, we had one of our last guests has 135 jumps. He's 50. He's 57, 58, and he's still in. He's going to be in for a couple more years. He's trying to get 173 jumps so he can be part of the 173rd club. And I had 110 jumps, but that's hard on your knees. I wouldn't want to jump again. I don't care where you're going to throw me out of.
Yeah, I can't blame you. In my case, just for the Civil War, when I started as a buck private with the 3rd U.S. Infantry. I had a basic sack coat, trousers, hat, musket, which was the most expensive thing at the time, and my leather accoutrements. When I finished, I had been promoted to a brigadier general. I went through every rank. I was in a group that actually, of course, this is all make believe, but their promotions were based on merit and your participation and all that sort of thing. But I got to the point where I was brigadier general. I had a horse. I had a dozen uniforms. I had, I don't know how many guns, and the responsibility got to be too much. It wasn't any fun anymore. So I wasn't having fun. Reason to do it. So I quit.
I feel all generals feel that way.
At one level, I enjoyed being able to write the battle scenarios. So being able to look at a battle like the Battle of Gettysburg and then just pick one little aspect of that 3-day battle that we could portray with the numbers that we had and the artillery and the cavalry and whatnot. Now, that's one of the larger reenactments every year. And we could usually, back then, we could count on anywhere from 10 to 20,000 reenactors, a couple hundred cannon and 600 or 700 horses. And that's a lot of organization. You're not just doing the reenactment anymore. Then it's part event staff. You have to coordinate the first aid and water and hay deliveries. I just say it gets to be a lot after a while. And people don't realize how much happens behind that. We've had tourists come in and say, "Oh, is that fire real?" Put your hand in and find out. Live out there. We cook out there.
There's the Erek I remember. Put your hand in there and find out.
Classics when the British attack. And it just,
So, how do you stay up on? You mentioned having an interest in and working on four different major wars: the Revolutionary War, Civil War,
Right.
World War I, World War II. Did that happen in a particular order? Were you doing them all at the same time? That must have been an enormous amount of effort.
Do you get
Well,
promoted? Do you get promoted in different ways to different wars? Like you start from Civil War, you could be like a brigadier general in the Civil War, but then you go back to a buck private in World War II, and
yeah, I mean, I have different impressions that I do for the different war. And for Civil War, the group I was in portrayed a general staff. So everybody had their roles, and we would be selected to command the Union troops at various reenactments. So at these big events like Gettysburg, we performed the duties that would have fallen under our rank, and we would have the positions that would have been held in those staffs: quartermaster and chief of staff, and provost marshal, and all that sort of thing. We'd be in charge of all of that. And we get promoted by the general and then chief of staff. We would have a ceremony, and that would only happen every so often. I mean, promotions were very slow during Civil War. And the same thing with our reenactment groups. Now, with the other wars, for World War II, I portray a German mountain troop. And there, I just wanted to be a private. I didn't want to, I told the commanding officer that if anybody tried to promote me, I'd shoot them. I didn't want to have to do it. So they load me up with medals instead of promotions. But the Revolutionary War, I was always a private, or the equivalent of a private. I portrayed a dragoon, cavalry, and German infantry from the Shenandoah Valley. And then for my World War I impression, I've been doing that since I got sick, and I'm limited as far as what I can do physically. I have been going down to the World War I Memorial here in DC on Sundays, and I wear a German uniform. I wear a private's uniform. My great grandfather served in the German army in World War I. I don't have the epaulets with his rank, but I have an original set of epaulets that have his infantry number on them. So that kind of lets me honor my ancestor. And I just go down there and I answer people's questions about World War I. Gives me something to do, and people look at me. I lost my left leg below the knee, so I have that out there that I'm a wounded veteran, and I've had people ask me if I'm a World War I veteran. I have people they come up and thank me for my service all the time. It's a little weird, and it shows you how poor people's general knowledge of history is. Because I'm wearing an Iron Cross. It's pretty clear I'm not wearing an American uniform, but people still come up and go, "Oh, did you serve in Iraq?"
but
No.
so it does prove that their history is a little off. I agree, but it does also prove their patriotism and they're willing to appreciate the
Oh,
arduous
sure.
sacrifice of veterans.
Yeah, I don't question that, and I'm glad that they're asking questions, because then that's why I'm doing it, and just be able to explain to people what's going on.
That's one of the things we've done here. James and I have done here. Have done this of the military, what people think happens behind the scenes in the military. I don't know if I told you this, James. People just don't know anything about. I was before 9/11. I was driving a Hummer down 95, going to some training, and I stopped at a rest stop, and there was some hippies, for lack of a better word, sitting in the grass and in the median of the rest stop, and this girl gets up and she's, "So this is a Hummer, huh?" I was like, "Yes, it is." And she's, "So this is bulletproof?" And we didn't even have bulletproof Hummers back then. It was a canvas top that was blowing in the wind. It's like, "Yeah, this canvas right here, it's bulletproof." And she's like, "Really, huh?" I was like, "Yeah, it's amazing." I mean, but it was just like no clue, no clue about how the world worked. But I can appreciate them not knowing exactly what you're doing there, and but I appreciate what you did too. That's cool.
Yeah, just because somebody is lacking the facts, it's no reason to make fun of them. Granted, there are that group of people whose mental capacity is worthy of some ridicule, but I wouldn't do, them not knowing their history.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll just come off of what you have talked about in terms of your uncle and your grandfather and your mom being German and having been born in Germany. Were there times when felt you were more European or German than American, or was it clear you were always American, or how did that work as you were growing up and now later in life?
I can't place myself squarely in either camp. It seemed like I I was personally more pro-American while I was in Europe, and definitely more pro-European while I'm in the United States. But it both sides have been such a big part of my upbringing and my background and my who I am that I can't really say that I'm one or the other. I hold a U.S. passport, but if I could get a German one, I would.
You know what? I'm curious why didn't go to school on the military base. Did you make that choice, or is it just location, or what was the reason?
Both. The American School of The Hague was definitely a better school than the Army school at Soesterberg, but it wasn't close. It would have been an hour and a half to get to school. So it just wasn't practical for us. And my dad told the Army that, and the Army paid for us to go to Ash.
I traveled an hour and a half to get to school every day.
I was going to say your perspective on supporting the US when you were in Europe and supporting Europe when you're in the US reflects your contrarian nature, Eric. You don't mind poking a stick in people's eye when you think it's appropriate, or at least when I knew you, you didn't mind sticking a pencil in someone's knee when they were bugging you. I still have the mark. It's been moving up my leg an inch every decade or so, but it's the way I never forgot you. I've had the pictures.
I have
I
to
was a
note that wasn't really a Melvin act so much as it was just for the hell of it.
Apparently, I was something of a tyrant as bus captain. I had forgotten all about that until I saw the picture. So, if you remember, do you feel like you gained any perspectives? I'm going to ask as a result of going to Ash, but we can expand it more broadly that you think are different from others who didn't have the same experience that Ashers did growing up. If you compare yourself now to colleagues and others that you know,
As far as what?
anything at all, how you view the world, whether you're contrarian or not contrarian, your appreciation for history, your approach towards life, anything that you might have picked up as you went to Ash. Does anything stick with you and you say, all right, this is what I got out of doing that experience?
For me, it's really more of a cumulative thing at this point. I mean, I'm 55 years old. I've seen and done a lot. And that time in Holland always sticks in my mind, not just because of Ash, but I like living in Holland. I learned to speak Dutch. I learned Afrikaans after I learned that, which is basically Dutch misspelled. I liked being there because of its location in Europe. We were close to everything, which are in Europe anyway. I mean, it's not like living here where you can drive for 3 days, but just social attitudes, openness to ideas and to foreigners, how everybody speaks a little shred of English or whatever your native tongue is, they know a little bit and they try to make, they make the effort. And I think a lot of that's lacking here in the States. You get so much, not outright xenophobia. Hey, this is America, speak English type of attitude. And I still, I'm a little disturbed by that. These people that never travel more than 20 miles from their home county. That's closed mindedness really disturbs me here in the US. And unfortunately, we've had an extra dose of that the last few years. But I miss living over there just for that reason, that there is a multitude of cultures within the culture that you're living in, that people try to understand who you are or where you're from, or at least are open to the idea that you're not one of them. Those are the things that I really miss, being able to sit down in an outdoor cafe somewhere and meet somebody from Morocco. Or here that happens, but not the way it does over there.
Snack questions, Eric. I remember you as being someone who was not infrequently eating or drinking something. You seem to have always had a tab can in your hand, and the snack bar guy was your friend. And it's only now that I realize that might have had something to do with your diabetes, I guess, or you tell me what was going on there.
No, that the soft drink thing really was more of an addiction to Dutch tab than anything else. That's all I've got to say about that. I'm sure there are a multitude of people I still owe a Gilder 25 to, which was the cost of a can and their little soda machine there. But snacking and that sort of thing, it kind of have something to do with diabetes. I have low blood sugars and I need to eat something to pep it up. But I like snacks. I'm a big fan of snacks. And poison is Diet Coke instead of Tab. And snacks, I'm a connoisseur of snacks, I have to say at this point. I'm good on salty snacks, sweet snacks, tips and dip, M&Ms. I have a reproduction of the Holy Grail from later Raiders of the Lost Ark, or from The Last Crusade, that's filled with M&Ms, which of course is what I would do if I had the Holy Grail sitting on my table.
Of course. Wouldn't we all?
So we're going to ask all Ashes this question, and it fits with your snack discussion. Frites with or without mayonnaise?
Without, unless it's McDonald's Fritos sauce.
All right.
That was a brilliant concoction. I'm sorry when we left, but other than that, no, I got to go with ketchup.
And peanut butter sauce?
No, that's a hard no. I don't think peanuts should be made into sauce.
Yeah, no, there were a few things that I suppose were not to everyone's taste. I suppose I could also ask about licorice. Should it be salty or sweet? But
I'm just not a big licorice fan either. I like Dutch chocolate. Dutch chocolate was pretty good. Puffertjes, outstanding.
Good addition to the everyone.
Absolutely.
Pancake houses.
Oh yeah, all
Yeah.
of those.
you remember how you got to school? Did you take public transportation? Did you walk
I took the bus until I got a moped, and then I took the moped.
until your tenure on the bus became untenable as a result of an incident with the bus captain? Is that what you're saying?
Might have something to do with that. I mean, it was just getting too violent in there.
I wonder how many of us were able to take a moped to school. Now that you mention it, that was quite the status symbol, wasn't it? You did whatever you could to get yourself a little Bromer.
It was, because it wasn't just, there was a minimum 50 cc's to ride on the Dutch bicycle trails, and the Dutch bicycle trails are fantastic. It was its own transportation system. Riding to school was no big deal. You weren't riding in traffic.
I wonder if they're all riding scooters to school nowadays on the
What?
bicycle trails.
Either that or electric scooters.
That's what I meant, the electric scooters, yeah.
Yeah.
You do any extracurricular activities, organized ones like sports or acting, or do you recall?
Oh, back then?
Yeah.
No. Played soccer for a couple seasons, and I did some theater, but not much. Not as much as you did.
Yeah,
He was-
we'll find
Yeah,
out.
it was always a comedy relief, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
On and off stage.
So now, Erek, if you are up for it, we might ask you some questions related to how to make better decisions in general. So this is a passionately wrong type question. If you
Got
can
it.
think of it.
40 on that, but go ahead.
No, I mean, it's not hard. It's more just what would be one or two decisions that you've made that you think had a big impact on your life, and maybe you could describe those for us.
One I can say is choosing to be a father. I can't tell you the full story, but I wound up adopting my son right from birth. And I can't say that there's any other experience that I've had that's been equal to being somebody's father. He lives with his mom now. She married somebody who was active duty Army, and they got posted to Fort Leavenworth. I always said it was better to be posted than sent to Fort Leavenworth. So they spent Kansas, but I make every effort to see him at least a couple times a year and spend some time with him. But watching somebody grow and having him at the point now, he's just turned 13, where it's an awesome responsibility to be a parent anyway. But when you think about it, when you are in a position to influence somebody's brain, when it is at 100% sponge status, that you can feed it anything you want. I mean, that's a lot of responsibility, but being able to converse with him, to watch the growth of his knowledge base and his vocabulary and just general understanding of people, it's amazing. I can't say that there's anything else like it. I don't know if I could have handled this full time. I've had a few other things going on that kind of prevent that, but even the little bit that I've had has been one of the greatest things I've ever done.
It is an awesome responsibility from the perspective that you have your intentions, but your kids are also watching you, right? So they're seeing what you do, and they are sponge-like. They pick up on good behavior, bad behavior. So taking that seriously and recognizing, I mean, one thing I notice about life in America is that it's very egocentric. People are focused on themselves and on how do I buy this thing and get that job and get this status. Fine, you need to make your way in the world, but you actually also are interacting with people all the time. And your kids and your family are a huge part of how you can have an impact. I like your answer. You're not just talking about having an impact on yourself, but the fact that you had an impact on your son. If you've ever made a poor decision, which we know is unlikely, Eric, but it could have happened, what are the factors that you think contributed to the suboptimal decision?
There was that one time when I was drunk and I jumped my horse over a creek. You do not want that.
But that happened a lot in the Civil War, probably.
In the Civil War, yeah. I mean, it's realistic as possible. The thing that changes is when Rebel Yell is the sponsor for your reenactment, they hand you a sip of whiskey before you take the field. That's just asking for trouble. The rest whiskey is awful, by the way. Yeah, but poor decisions. I have a hard time looking at things as a poor decision. I mean, granted that I've made those and there are those, but I'm one of those people that likes to learn from my mistakes. I don't have any regrets. I can honestly say that because I can't go back and change it. I did what I did. And everything that I did after that, everything that I did before that led up to that decision or was affected by that decision. And that's part of the experience. I don't dwell on that kind of thing.
All right. So that's a good takeaway all by itself, which is to say, look, regrets are not necessarily productive and you can learn something from every experience. That's a good lesson that goes back in philosophy a long way in terms of whether the person serves as a good example or a bad example. You can learn something from every circumstance, every situation. What advice would you give a friend or your son, for that matter, or anyone facing an important decision, how to approach making good decisions?
First, I'd say hire a lawyer.
Nice.
That, depending on the circumstance, I'd hate to be the one making that, having that influence. The only thing I could do is relate something similar that's happened to me and what I did with it. But, I've avoided with my son making any rules except for one. There is rule number one, and it's been that rule since he could talk. And that rule is be safe. And it's not just be safe and don't cut yourself or run with the scissors or jump naked through trees. It's be safe with other people's emotions, be safe with your decisions, be safe about the kind of foods you eat. It's almost the all-encompassing rule. I could make a bunch of other rules, but they'd all come back to being safe.
Interesting. So under that rubric, you could say you're lumping physical health, emotional health, relationships with others, a thoughtful approach to taking decisions in life focused around making sure that you're there to keep on making decisions. That sounds good. Anything else about Ash or otherwise that we didn't get to that you said, hey, I want a chance to mention this. There's somebody I need to say something to, or otherwise. It's okay if you don't, but just we want to always leave an open-ended point for people to be able to say what's on their mind, Eric.
Sure. I mean, I just right off the top of my head, one of the things I loved about living in Holland was anywhere in Europe, but when we were in Holland, the history. I mean, certainly a lot of World War II, but going right back to the Romans, the reclamation of land that the Dutch achieved, the Spanish War of names just went right out of my head. The Habsburgs, Austria owned Holland at one point. I met James Gavin at a commemoration of the Battle of Oosterbeek from Operation Market Garden in World War II. The guy was a 5-star general, broke his back in the jump. I met him when he was 90 something at the time. The opportunity to do stuff like that. One town over from where I lived was one of the V2 rocket launch sites during World War II. You could still see where Germans had carved their names into trees, and you could see the railroad tracks and the bunkers, all those leftovers. I mean, you put a spade in the ground anywhere in Europe, and you're going to find everything. I mean, you'll find something, ring tabs from the 1970s, then you'll find World War II, then you find World War I, then you find something from the Napoleonic Wars. And the fact that was the same no matter where you went, I loved it.
Yeah, I can tell history has played an important role in your life, Eric. You have a visceral sense of how history not only happened, but is still present around us today. It's interesting to hear. And I can also see that you would be a lot of fun in these reenactments because you got good knowledge to share and you are having fun, but you're taking it seriously. So it's a nice combination.
I try very hard to make history relatable because the one thing that always seems to kill history for students is it's so freaking boring. And the guys that teach it are boring. And you have to be able to make something real and visceral for people. That's why I like standing on a battleground with somebody and explaining to them why something happened because of the way the ground shifts or the way it drops away and you can't hear cannons firing because of something called acoustic shadowing. And people don't understand that. When they look at a map in a book, it's flat and it doesn't show them where tree lines are, where little creeks are, where rock beds are. Being able to relate that and like I said, reading all of these people's personal accounts from diaries or from reports, and being able to show them that this is what they were thinking, this is what they were feeling. And a few years ago, I had an opportunity to give a tour. I started doing this thing where I would give freelance tours to people around the mid-Atlantic area for Rev War or Civil War. And I'd wear a uniform and they would tell me how much time they had and what they were interested in. And I put a tour together for them. One day I had a call from this senator, a United States senator, who wanted to take a tour with his dad. And so they had some money. They flew their G5 around to all these different sites and would just meet me there. But we did a tour of the Civil War battlefields of Manassas, 1st and 2nd. We did the battlefield of Antietam. We did Gettysburg. Then we also did Philadelphia for the Rev War and Valley Forge. And it was very, very interesting because this guy was on the Appropriations Committee. And I made a point of relating things to him the way he sees them now. You have the same deal with care of veterans, health care, benefits, pay, weaponry, supplies. I mean, all of these things. I mean, they're the same issues. Just the clock changes. That's it. They were still running blue ribbon commissions to find out who made a mistake and who was responsible and point fingers at each other, whether it was 1865 or 1965. That's something I'm as glad he didn't really think about or realize in those terms because history was just a dry thing in a book. So I was glad I got to talk to him.
Randy, that's something I was curious about, and I wonder if you saw any of it. Of all the institutions, you think the military would have a pretty strong interest in paying attention to history, what happened in this battle or that battle, and what can we learn from it? Is that something that happened only in officer training school, or did you have a sense of it yourself and see it, or was some of the stuff Eric's describing, did that ever come up for you?
In our professional development schools, they would talk somewhat about relatable historical events, but as it progressed through 9/11 and past, most of those examples ended up being 4 or 5 years ago. Okay, this is the way it was after 9/11 started. So these are lessons learned. It became a lessons learned thing and less of a history lessons learned, but more of a 9/11 GWAT, Global War on Terrorism, lessons learned kind of thing. I do believe that, I mean, when I went to the Sergeant Major Academy, we had some history lessons and we had to do research and give research projects to each other. And I'm pretty sure that the command schools also do similar things. And then when you go to postgraduate school, you do research projects and try to give some new insight on topics and things like that. But as a whole, I have a history degree too, Eric, that I got after I flunked out of college and then went in the Army for 12 years. And then I got my first degree, which was a BA in American history. And I didn't appreciate history when I was in Holland or Europe. We went to all these memorials. My dad was a big history buff, and we used to go to all the memorials in Belgium and in Normandy and all over Germany and stuff like that. And
Right.
I didn't really appreciate it, nor did I ever intend on going in the military, nor did I have any interest in the military until one day I said, I'd like to challenge myself and see if I can be in the military, but it wasn't really out of patriotism because I'd lived out of the United States my whole life. I was a patriot in a way that I thought America was the greatest country ever, but I was more brainwashing than patriotism, I think. Once I went to war, I went to Panama in '89, and once I saw that some of my friends get hurt or die and things like that, that's when it became more personal to me. And then I got more interested in history. And plus, When I came in the military, everyone thought some kind of Vietnam was going to be the next war. I mean,
Right.
unless it was World War III across the gap and Russia coming invading, it was going to be in some third world country again. And so at that time, all me and all my peers and I were reading Vietnam journals and about how do they fight in Vietnam and how do we lose that war and how do we win it next time and things like that. So that's what I was reading in the 90s before 9/11.
Yeah, and I hear that, but a lot of reenactors are either active duty or veterans. A lot of the talk goes to their experiences in actual war and the training they received. But there are things that, like the U.S. Army training manual, the basic manual, still dates back to the Revolutionary War, and that Jackson's campaign in 1862 still studied at West Point for its tactics. So we keep looking back to history. There are all these examples that are brought up. They're still today. I remember watching an interview with Norman Schwarzkopf after the first Gulf War and hearing him reference studying German desert armor tactics from World War II.
Africa.
They attacked Iraq and went around Kuwait. That was interesting. And it's probably not a good thing to talk about using your enemy's tactics, but it worked.
I know. I remember when we first went into Afghanistan, everyone was pulling up The Bear Went Over the Mountain, which was the only book that was out there about a Russian invasion of Afghanistan, and it was so hard to read. It was so dense. And
Oh, yeah.
but now 20 years later, you can't walk into a bookstore without seeing a bunch of books about or personal memoirs about Afghanistan, Iraq, and stuff like that. Only thing, but that we only had one or two books available when we first went in 2002, 2003.
As a history student, Afghanistan is a perfect example of not learning your history and repeating it again over and over again.
That is one of the things we're trying to help people with our indirect lessons here on Passionately Wrong, Erek, is how to learn from your mistakes, and if not yours, the mistakes of others. I think this has been an interesting and fun discussion for us. Hopefully it's been interesting and fun for you. If any of your old classmates want to get in touch with you, can we put your email in the show notes, or is Facebook the best way for people to see what's going on?
Either Facebook or my email, Erek@erekthebug.com. I mean, I have to mention this just because it's been the center of my life for the last year and a half. I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in February of last year and given 6 to 12 months to live. Let's see, I think I've beaten that, but apparently they put me on some kind of drug that's helping me live. But that kind of threw my life up in a whirlwind. Had to sell my house, give away my dog, lost my job. I've been living on my sister's couch for a year and a half. So that's the sort of thing that gives you a little more perspective about decisions you've made, good and bad, and what happens when you're faced with a sudden abbreviation of your lifespan. And now I haven't died yet, but nobody knows when or how that's going to happen. So I'm pretty much in everybody else's position, except I still have the cancer, but I've had to think about it.
I can only imagine how it changes your perspective, but maybe you give us a little bit of what do you mean when you say that it changes your perspective? Obviously, you think things are going to end. So you took concrete steps, selling your house, selling your stuff, moving in with
Right.
your sister so you could be close to where you're getting treated. How's your relationship with your sister in the meantime? And tell me about the perspective that you referred to. What do you mean?
I've always had a great relationship with my sister, even since we were little kids, probably because of the life experiences we had from very young ages. She's really been helping take care of me when I needed it. And I've been able to get stronger. And like I said, I'm missing my left leg. I deal with a lot of this with a sense of humor. So whenever somebody asks me, which people usually don't, but if somebody asks me how I lost my leg, my first answer is I lost a knife fight with a midget. The little bastard just had the high ground and I couldn't help it, which is a lot quicker than explaining how it actually happened. But I've had that happen. I've lost 3.5 toes on my right foot. I've had a kidney transplant, a pancreas transplant, triple bypass. I've had my right knee replaced. All of this because I was a diabetic from age 5. And diabetes is a death sentence. It'll kill you a little piece at a time. And that's what it was doing. When I had the kidney transplant and then the pancreas transplant, my diabetes was cured. That was in 2017. But the cancer was an unexpected bonus. And then after a few months of dealing with that and the poisons we were throwing at it, my pancreas quit. So I'm back to being a diabetic again since June, which wasn't that big a deal because I knew what I was doing. I was just a minor bump in the otherwise cancer predominated role here. I am just doing what I can to stay alive and having fun with what I've got. That kind of perspective, when you read stories and fairy tales and whatever, either fiction or nonfiction books that talk about life and suddenly facing the end or what might be the end, I take some lessons from some of that stuff. The no regrets thing, I have to believe is true. My life is my life. I wouldn't be who I am without the experiences I had. And I can't dwell on stupid mistakes I made or bad ideas. I haven't forgotten them, and I haven't forgotten the lesson I've learned from them. But you think about all of that kind of stuff, and I prefer to have a sense of humor about it and just do what makes me happy for now, which is history, basically.
That's a really good perspective. I mentioned this before we started, that all the military guys in the last 20 years, who most of them, probably over 75% of the guys actually deployed to Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, one of those places. And they were ordered to prepare for the worst by filling out their will and figuring out who gets their life insurance and things like that. And a lot of them didn't take it seriously in the beginning, the younger guys. The older guys had family, kids or wife or something like that. So don't really think about what's going to happen. And it's funny because some of the weirdest stuff, a friend of mine died and I was trying to help his wife out. And she's 6 months later, she's trying to get the electric bill in her name. And they're like, do you know? Well, but it was in his name, right? Not both of their names. And so they're like, hey, we can't, do you know his fifth grade social studies teacher's name? And she's, no. We have some secret questions. Do you mind answering? He's like, yeah, I know my husband really well. We've been married for however long. She's like, what's his favorite outdoor activity? You have these weird questions, right? And she's like, hunting, fishing. I don't know him at all. I never knew him. And she goes into another thing like that. And so just these crazy scenarios where you couldn't prepare. How are you going to prepare your loved one for that? Because you just didn't think about putting the telephone. The telephone's the worst. You can't change the dang thing unless you got 18 different pieces of paper. And then the younger guys would put the strangest things because you had to prepare a paper 15-page thing with all your funeral preparations, what music you wanted, what flowers you wanted, who did you want to be there? Did you want your stepdad there or your stepbrother there? And then they would put all this weird stuff thinking it was funny or it would be cool to play Metallica at their funeral. And then their family comes, they're like, what is going on? Why is the army so retarded? Why are they playing Metallica at my son's funeral? And that's what he wanted. And then the commanders at the beginning, I think some of this stuff actually went through and the platoon tried to get together and get whatever he wanted at the funeral and get the people there and everything. And then later on, people started looking at what their people were writing and going, hey, man, go back and do this right. Do something that's reasonable, that's respectful, that your family's, no, this is the way I want it. It's like, no one's going to do that for you. The army's not going to pay for you. You're making your platoon who went through your death, if you died, having to do this. And so it was traumatic, and they had to do it every time they went back. Some of these guys went back 10 times, and every time they had to look at it again and update it and talk to the people and stuff like that. And I imagine that was really tough for you to make these decisions and decide to sell your stuff and where you wanted to move and everything like that. I can't imagine. It's not the same because as opposed to us where we think we're going to live forever and this is a silly piece of paper until it happens, you're like, okay, I got so much time to live and here's my 18-month calendar. I got to make a plan of what I need to do, what I want to do. And I mean, I guess.
Yeah, I didn't really do much of that. I took care of the big things like my house and my dog, which has been the worst part of all of this. But the one thing I did hold on to was my militaria collections. To give you a little idea, That's just a little tiny bit of it. I kept all of that stuff. I had uniforms and medals and equipment and books and documents and you name it. But I mean, that really was the only thing that's worth anything that I owned. And if I were going to leave it to somebody like my son, that's the only thing I've got. Yeah. So I held on to that. That's all sitting in a storage box in Springfield somewhere. But through the miracle of modern drugs, I'm still alive. And at some point, maybe I'll move into a house again and get another dog and be able to move all my stuff back. But in the meantime, I'm just living here watching Hawaii Five-0 and drinking Diet Coke.
People could do worse than adopt your approach to life, Erek. I think the fact that you keep a sense of humor and you are very funny, it can be biting at times, but nonetheless, I don't blame you. It's not a defense mechanism, but it's certainly a way to arrange yourself so that you don't feel sad about stuff that, it's your choice. You're going to live your life miserable or you're going to live your life the best that you can. And everybody has that choice. They face it under less extreme circumstances, but really we all have the same choice to make every single day. Am I going to be a miserable grouch, unhappy about the bad luck that I face, or am I going to laugh at the dumb things that happen and move on?
I never saw any use in complaining, and I certainly never saw any need to go out in a field somewhere and shake my fist at the sky yelling, why? It's not like I made a bad decision and it happened to me. It's happened to me.
So I'm going to say thank you for letting us into your life today for a little bit. And we hope that it remains a long one and you continue to defy the odds, Erek. I really do hope that we can have a follow-up with you a year from now, 2 years from now, and then every year on the anniversary. But otherwise, we wish you the best. And thanks for coming on and being our inaugural Ask Guest. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, James and Randy. I appreciate the opportunity. I look forward to next time.
Thanks a lot, Erek. Appreciate it.
We'd love to hear what you think, so please comment on the show with your thoughts. We read all of your comments.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for subscribing. See you next time.